By the late 80s, comic book movies had a pretty terrible reputation in Hollywood. After several, let's politely call them questionable Superman sequels, most studios figured superhero movies were nothing more than expensive Saturday morning cartoons. Nobody serious made them, and nobody serious made money from them. Ironically, the one studio that still believed in comic books was Warner Brothers, the same studio that had made those Superman movies in the first place. Even then, Warner wasn't exactly overflowing with confidence. Superman had cost around $55 million back in 1978. Batman just $35 million over a decade later. They handed the project to a director most people barely knew, and cast an actor almost nobody could picture as Bruce Wayne. To make the whole thing look a little less risky, Warner needed one undeniable superstar. That turned out to be Jack Nicholson. At the time, comic book movies weren't exactly considered prestigious, so convincing Nicholson to sign on required one very sophisticated Hollywood strategy. Throw money at him, then throw some more. Nicholson's deal, built around a percentage of the box office, became the biggest acting payday in Hollywood history. The record stood until The Matrix Reloaded and The Matrix Revolutions, when Keanu Reeves reportedly walked away with around $125 million. But Jack wasn't satisfied with just making history. He negotiated enough perks to make the Joker jealous. Because Nicholson loved Hollywood parties, his shooting schedule was unlike anyone else's. He'd arrive later than everybody else, sit down in his chair, and immediately fall asleep. While Jack enjoyed his nap, makeup artists transformed him into the Joker. Around lunchtime, he'd wake up fully painted, film until evening, then head straight to another celebrity party while everyone else kept working. Years later, Nicholson said the Joker was one of his favorite roles. In fact, after Batman came out on home video, he watched it once a week for quite a while because he enjoyed watching himself. Then again, making around $100 million from one movie probably makes repeat viewings a lot more enjoyable. Casting Vicky Vale turned into its own adventure. According to Tim Burton, Kim Basinger had always been their first choice. The filmmakers wanted to meet with her, but her agent refused to even schedule a conversation unless they made a financial offer first. The producers decided she wasn't quite famous enough to start writing blank checks, so they hired Sean Young instead. Then Sean Young fell off a horse during rehearsals and broke her collarbone. The producers immediately went running back to Kim Basinger's agent with significantly larger checks this time. The funniest part? The horseback riding scene that cost Sean Young the role didn't even survive the movie. Burton was so shaken by the accident that once filming began, he simply cut the entire sequence. Meanwhile, almost everyone expected Batman to flop. The press absolutely hated everything they heard about the production, and the coverage was overwhelmingly negative. Warner decided to fight back. Instead of waiting for the finished movie, the studio rushed together a trailer using unfinished footage and quietly shipped it to a single theater in California as a test. The audience had no idea what they were about to see. The trailer ended and the theater exploded into applause. Soon, theaters around the country were reporting something almost impossible to believe today. People were buying tickets to completely different movies just so they could watch the Batman trailer. Then they'd get up and leave. Remember, this was years before YouTube. When Batman finally opened in June 1989, it became the highest-grossing movie in America that year. Worldwide, it finished second only to Indiana Jones and The Last Crusade. Warner immediately wanted a sequel. There was just one problem. Tim Burton didn't even like the first movie. In interviews, Burton admitted Batman had some great scenes, but as a whole, he thought the film was honestly pretty boring. Unfortunately for Warner, there was only one person they wanted directing the sequel, so they gave Burton almost everything he asked for. In the first Batman, Jack Nicholson had all the leverage. In Batman Returns, Burton had it. Many people believe Burton received more creative control than almost any studio director at the time. Ironically, that creative freedom would eventually destroy Burton's relationship with the franchise. While Burton was off making Edward Scissorhands and repeatedly saying no to Batman 2, Warner kept developing a straightforward sequel on its own. It looked a lot like the first movie. The villains were already Penguin and Catwoman. There was snow. There were insane Santas carrying AK-47s. Batman was still the main character, and much more time was devoted to Bruce Wayne and Vicky Vale's relationship, with Kim Basinger expected to return. Penguin wasn't even the main threat. He was basically a small-time criminal searching for billions of dollars buried somewhere in Gotham. Eventually, Burton finished Edward Scissorhands and started warming up to the idea of returning. Warner moved fast. Burton negotiated an enormous salary, complete creative control, and made sure Michael Keaton got paid too. Keaton demanded $11 million. The studio wasn't thrilled. Burton's response was simple: pay him or find another director. Warner paid him. Once Burton had the keys to Gotham, he immediately brought in Heather's screenwriter Daniel Waters. Together, they rewrote almost everything Sam Hamm had written. Now, you might think the original script with armed psychopath Santas and gangsters hunting buried treasure couldn't possibly have been any weirder than the finished movie. Trust me, it was. That buried treasure just happened to be hidden directly beneath the Batcave because, apparently, Gotham's real estate map had been written by a drunk Scooby-Doo writer. And Robin? Robin was a 12-year-old kung fu expert, because obviously that's exactly what Batman needed. Burton threw almost all of that into the trash. The plan was for Marlon Wayans to eventually become Robin in the third movie, and he was even supposed to make a small appearance in Batman Returns as a mechanic. Wayans actually went through a costume fitting. Then Burton deleted every single scene involving him. There was another problem. Burton couldn't figure out what was so interesting about the Penguin. As he later admitted, all he saw was a short gangster in a top hat smoking a cigar. Not exactly the most fascinating villain in the world. But Penguin and Catwoman were already locked in, so Burton decided to reinvent him completely. Instead of a mob boss, he became a tragic sewer monster with childhood trauma and a serious grudge against humanity. Unfortunately, redesigning the Penguin was the easy part. Nobody could figure out what his actual evil plan was supposed to be. At one point, Warner suggested having Penguin freeze all of Gotham City. Burton hated the idea, which just proves that terrible ideas don't disappear. Sometimes they simply wait a few years until Batman and Robin comes along. Meanwhile, the budget kept climbing. Burton's salary went up. Keaton's salary went up. Development dragged on. Then Burton looked at every set from the first Batman, the sets Warner had carefully stored for 2 years while paying roughly $250,000 a year just to keep them, and said no. Everything was scrapped. Gotham had to be built all over again. Casting Catwoman became another nightmare. For a long time, Annette Bening was attached to the role, but just before filming began, she got pregnant and had to leave the project. Jodie Foster was offered the part next. She immediately said no. Then came Sean Young, or more accurately, Sean Young came after Tim Burton. According to one of Hollywood's favorite stories, she became so determined to get the role that she actually forced her way into Burton's office. Burton reportedly hid under his desk. Eventually, the role finally went to Michelle Pfeiffer, who received the biggest paycheck of her career up to that point. If you add together what Burton, Keaton, and Nicholson's replacement cast, and the other major actors were paid, nearly a third of Batman Returns' entire budget disappeared into the bank accounts of a handful of very talented people. Warner didn't care. The first Batman had made so much money that the studio basically stopped saying no. If Burton wanted something, Burton got it. The actual production wasn't especially chaotic, unless you consider the fact that half of Warner Brothers Studios was occupied by one movie. Roughly 50% of the studio's sound stages belonged to Batman Returns. Security was everywhere. Warner treated the production like it contained nuclear launch codes. Then one photograph of Danny DeVito as the Penguin leaked to the press. Warner hired private investigators to find whoever was responsible. Whether they failed or the photographer mysteriously vanished into Gotham's sewer system, officially, nobody knows how that story ended. The marketing campaign became just as expensive because people apparently couldn't stop stealing Michelle Pfeiffer posters. Catwoman posters vanished from bus stops and billboards almost as fast as workers could replace them. Imagine being a police officer and getting a new assignment: protect the horny Batman posters. Believe it or not, that was close to reality. In several cities, police patrol routes were reportedly adjusted to keep a closer eye on bus stops and advertising displays that were constantly being vandalized by people trying to steal Catwoman posters. Things got even more complicated when the MPAA initially slapped the movie with an R rating. Warner had to trim several scenes the ratings board considered too explicit before the film was finally allowed to keep its PG-13 rating. Even then, plenty of parents were furious after the premiere. They expected another Batman movie. Instead, they got a Christmas nightmare filled with sewer monsters, leather-clad Catwoman, and a penguin that looked like he hadn't showered since birth. Thanks to the massive success of the first Batman and Michelle Pfeiffer accidentally becoming America's most wanted poster, Batman Returns entered 1992 as the year's biggest movie event. Opening weekend couldn't have gone much better. The film earned $47 million domestically, setting a brand new opening weekend record. Jurassic Park would break that record a year later. But after that, everything changed. The movie dropped fast. Audiences weren't ready for Burton's much stranger vision of Gotham. This wasn't just another superhero movie. It was a gothic Christmas fever dream about circus terrorists, abandoned sewer babies, and Batman somehow being the most normal person in the entire film. Many viewers simply wanted another Batman. They got Tim Burton completely unleashed instead. Years later, Batman Returns would become a cult favorite, and eventually earn almost as much respect as the original. But in 1992, Warner wasn't celebrating. The film earned $266 million worldwide on an $80 million budget. That's a perfectly successful movie. The problem was that Batman had earned $411 million worldwide on a budget of only $35 million. That disappointment effectively killed Burton's plans for a third Batman movie. This time, Warner wasn't about to hand him unlimited creative freedom again. While Burton was still attached to Batman 3, Michael Keaton was expected to return, and Rene Russo had already been cast as the female lead. Everything changed after Burton left. Keaton followed him out the door. Val Kilmer became the new Batman, and suddenly Warner decided Rene Russo was too old to play opposite Kilmer. She was replaced. Burton later joked that if he had stayed, the movie would never have been called Batman Forever. He hated titles like that. According to Burton, they sounded more like something a drunk guy gets tattooed in Las Vegas. His version of the movie would have featured only one villain, the Riddler. Two-Face didn't join the story until Joel Schumacher took over. Michael Keaton later explained that even after Burton left, he still could have returned. Then he met Joel Schumacher and realized the franchise was heading in a completely different direction. The darker Gotham was disappearing. The movie was turning into what Keaton described as a cartoon. That was enough. He walked away. Of course, there's another version of the story. Keaton reportedly wanted $15 million. Val Kilmer agreed to wear the cape for $7 million. Sometimes Hollywood's biggest creative decisions are surprisingly good at math. If Batman Returns hadn't fallen so sharply at the box office, we probably would have gotten a Catwoman spin-off starring Michelle Pfeiffer. Ironically, Burton himself had no interest in bringing Catwoman back. It was Warner that insisted she appear in the movie's final scene, hoping to set up a future spin-off. Michelle Pfeiffer wasn't even available when that ending was filmed. A stand-in had to wear the costume instead. But after Batman Returns earned less than Warner expected, the studio slowly lost interest. A few years later, Michelle Pfeiffer officially walked away from the project. Warner kept trying to make a Catwoman movie anyway. And after years of development, this is what we got. That was Frame Back. Subscribe for more rewinds and see you on the next one.